everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video I'm doing an exciting book tag. I'm doing the bi book tag, or the bisexual book tag, and this was created by a booktuber on this platform called Books with Leo. And yeah, she just basically created this original book tag and I was so interested. I was subscribed to her channel for a while, but I just recently came upon it. And if you don't know, I just recently came out as bisexual. I did a whole blog post about it, about the 5 bisexual books that actually helped me come out. So I will link that blog post down below, but it has some great book recommendations with bisexual main characters that really resonated with me. And honestly, just like reading books about characters and feeling seen just makes it a whole lot easier to come out. So yeah, I thought in honor that I would bring that kind of positivity and just that vibe. I'm still like riding a high of like coming out and just being so open and happy with my sexuality, and bringing that to YouTube where I talk about some bisexual books. So some of these books that I will be using for this tag do have bisexual main characters, but disclaimer, some of them do not, and I thought they just fit the questions really well. All the questions have to do a little bit with being bisexual, so I think that would help. So I'm going to pull up my computer here. So if you see me looking down, I'm looking at my computer and reading the questions and the books that I have associated with them. So let's get started. So the first question on this book tag is confusion. A lot of people think bisexuals are just confused. Spoiler alert, we're not. But sometimes sexuality can be a confusing thing when you are just figuring it out. Name a book character who is also going through a journey of figuring things out. And for this question, I have chosen Shadow and Bone by, who's it by? By Leigh Bardugo. I wrote by Alina Starkov. That's just the main character. But yeah, I thought this is a great kind of, it does play upon the trope of like a character finding out that they have this amazing power, and then kind of having to deal with that. But I thought out of every story with that trope that I've read, I think this one really handled it really well. Especially because our main character Alina finds out that she has, I think it's Alina, finds out that she has this amazing power that is detrimental but is also working against her. So I think she kind of has to grapple with that of feeling powerful but also knowing that it could harm a lot of people and that she's actually could be used as a weapon against, you know, the people that she's trying to protect. So I think that's a whole really great self-discovery story, but also grappling with two sides of a coin, basically. And I also really love that story. Everyone's pretty much read it on BookTube. Shadow and Bone, fantasy, Leigh Bardugo kills it every time with her books. But I think this book, other than just being a great fantasy book with a really cool world and magic building, there's also really great characters who are deeply flawed. Let me tell you, the characters in her books are so flawed, but it's what makes them so relatable. And honestly, just I think Alina is probably one of my favorite heroines because she's dealing with this idea of she doesn't know who to trust because she has this power, and being powerful sometimes is great, but it's also not great. So I think for that one I'm choosing Alina. The next question on this list is first crush, the first queer crush. Name a book with a character in it that totally made you swoon. For this one, I'm going to throw it back a little bit into my old days of reading. By that I mean when I first started blogging, I was consuming so much books, so many books. I was reading so much, not so much now. But for that, I have chosen Alice Bell from Alice in Zombieland. If you don't know, Alice in Zombieland is, I think it's young adult, but it was definitely in the first phase of young adult books with like, I feel like it was like published around like Twilight. But basically it's about this girl named Alice Bell, and she discovers that she has this like supernatural like mission, basically. Like her father's been telling her of all these stories, and then something tragic happens and she awakens this power inside of her, and it's basically like zombies killing zombies, but they're like spiritual zombies, so she has to enter the spirit world in order to kill them. So I think, first of all, that plot alone, I love Gina Showalter's books. Any Gina Showalter book I fucking love. But Alice in Zombieland was one of the first books that I read that got me into blogging. I think because of it. Also, I got it at the Scholastic Book Fair. We love Scholastic. But basically after reading that book, I decided that I wanted to talk about books and that I love books, and I fell in love with Alice. She is a badass. She kills friggin' zombies. And she also is just grappling with being like a teenager in high school and trying to deal with that with a normal life and some tragedy in her life, but also killing zombies. Come on, that's just epic. And I totally had a crush on her, and I don't think I realized it at the time, but I did have a crush on her. I basically had a crush on any character in Gina Showalter's books. But yeah, for that one I'm choosing Alice. So the next question is, coming out, that moment when you're ready to acknowledge your sexuality. Name a book that made you want to scream and gush at the top of your lungs about to everyone you know. The book I've chosen for this question is Noteworthy by Riley Redgate. Noteworthy is one of those books, it's an Own Voices books, and it's one of those books that when I read, I kind of just basically fell in love with and I couldn't stop recommending to people. I think the representation is awesome, but along with that, the writing and the plot, it was just so beautiful. I loved it. This book basically follows a girl named Jordan, and after being rejected from her school musical for the 3rd time, she decides to audition for this all-male a cappella group. And yeah, as you can see, it's a gender-bending story. She dresses up as a male and she wants to prove herself, basically. So the main character is bisexual, and there are other characters, side characters, that fall along the spectrum of the LGBT spectrum. And I just really love this book. The main character is just the most... I just love the main character. I think basically I saw myself in the main character. In finding out her sexuality through this gender-bending story, I believe. It also talks about a cappella groups, which I'm in an a cappella group in college, and I think that's partly why I related to it so much, because a lot of things they were talking about, a lot of things, the story itself was kind of similar to my own story. I didn't like join an all-male a cappella group, but I'm in an all-female a cappella group, and I think those, and we do interact a lot with the all-male a cappella group, and I think in doing so, I think I related a lot to this story, just thinking about the fine lines that clearly define male voices from female voices. So yeah, highly recommend this book, and it definitely helped me in realizing my sexuality, because in the same way, Jordan is also realizing her sexuality in this book, and I really resonated with that. Okay, the next question is recognition. Unfortunately, bi erasure is still a thing. Name a book that made you feel seen and valued / understood. For this book, I've chosen The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue. This book was super popular on BookTube, I believe. I read it when everyone was recommending it, and I really loved it. I think I loved it definitely because the characters were so unapologetically bi and bisexual, and that for me, that was the first book I kind of read that was kind of like, I'm here, I am loud and proud, that kind of thing. I think a lot of the books that I had been reading before that were a lot of people trying to come out, and a lot of people exploring their sexuality and being honestly bi-curious. Whereas in this book, The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue, Henry, our main character, he's basically traveling on a grand tour of Europe before he has to settle down and kind of claim his family's like wealth, and you know, his legacy, his family's legacy. And I thought the main character was just so unapologetically bi that it made me really, I guess at that time I was still questioning my sexuality, so at that time it made me feel really just like proud about questioning my sexuality and kind of thinking that there's something else. So yeah, I really enjoyed that book. I think it's also so funny. I think it just, the story kind of revolves around him being bi and the other queer characters in this book. I don't think it's something that's super obvious. I think it was so natural and so well played out, really well written as well, and it's just a fun old story that talks a lot about, you know, having fun with your sexuality and not being afraid to like flaunt it to the world even though society expects you to be a certain way. Because definitely in this book I think it talks a lot about the expectations that were held by his father and his family and the world around him to be a certain thing. So yeah, definitely recommend this book. Okay, the next question that we have is 50-50. Sexuality is fluid and so is bisexuality. Almost no one is 50-50. Name a book about which you're unsure whether you love or hate it. Your own and not 50-50 opinion-wise. So a book that I'm unsure whether I love it or hate. So I read The Bride Test by Helen Huang, because I basically love the kiss quotient, and I'm 50-50, or I can't tell if I love it or hate it. I love it because I read the kiss quotient, absolutely loved her writing. The Bride Test was the same thing. I love the writing, and there's great rep. The main character is autistic, and there's just great Asian representation. But I thought the bride test compared to the kiss quotient, and I think my fault why I decided that I'm like not liking it is because I was comparing it too much to the kiss quotient, which I should stop doing, but I thought it was kind of slow compared to that story, and it was a lot cheesier than I really wanted in like an adult romance book. So that's probably a reason why I'm leaning on the side of not really enjoying it. I buddy read it with my boyfriend as well, so it was interesting because he really loved it. Like, he is a sucker for adult romance and he loved the bride test, and I just really wasn't that into it. So talking about that was interesting because he was telling me all the parts that he liked, and I was like, that didn't seem cheesy to you? And he's like, no. And I'm like, interesting, cool. Okay, and the last question that we have here is community. Finding your place in a community can be hard. Sometimes I feel like I'm too gay for the straight people and too straight for the gay people. But in the end, it's all about finding the right people in life that love you. Sexuality doesn't define you. Name a book with an amazing group of friends / community. And for this question, I have chosen such a timely book, but honestly, if I had gotten this video out earlier, it would have been even more timely. I have chosen The Voting Booth by Brandy Colbert, or Colbert. I think this book is honestly one that I didn't expect to like. I read it because Brandy Colbert is like an author, an auto-bi-author for me. I love her books. I loved every single one of them, Finding Yvonne, Little Lion, but I think this book definitely, I do think that I was kind of iffy about it because it did talk a lot about politics and voting, and I was like, I don't know how I feel about this, especially bringing politics into my book life and the book world, but I think more than ever I've realized that you can't separate the two. Like, you can't not be political on Bookstagram, you can't not be political in books, because this is the only way that people are going to start talking about it and start questioning their views. So yeah, The Voting Booth by Brandy Colbert basically follows two teenagers who it's their first time voting. And one of the teenagers, I'm blanking on their names right now, but one of the teenagers, the girl, she's super energetic about it. This is her first year voting. She's encouraging everyone she knows, and the guy who she ends up meeting is not so enthusiastic about it, and he's kind of questioning why do we need to vote, what's the importance in voting, and through their meeting they kind of question each other's values. Like, she's questioning him, she's like, why don't you think voting is important, but he's also like, you know, making her reevaluate some things about community and about how to question her political views or something like that. And the reason why I chose this for the community question is because I think there's a great example of the mobilization of community in this book. In this book, it's not only these two main characters, it's these two main characters interacting with the community and in waiting on the voting line at the polls. It's talking about voting and politics in a way that involves the entire community, and I really loved it. And there's also a super nice, it's not really a twist, but it's something that's like not explained in the back of the book that is so cute, and that an aspect that I really loved in the book that just brings the entire community of the book together. So for that reason, I highly recommend this book. I think this book is, I think a lot of people are shy to read it, honestly, because they don't want to read about voting in books, but I think this is a really good example of how it teaches you some things. Like, this book talked about voter suppression, racism, being black in America, and social justice and like injustices, and I think that's super important to be reading in young adult literature because I think that's where we learn most of our stuff. I learned most of what I know now as a human being from books, so I think it's really hard to say that we should separate the two, like learning like education and knowledge in books. But yeah, that's my choice for that one. That's pretty much it for the bisexual book tag. I will leave all the questions down below. Don't forget to check out the original tag maker's video, Books with Leo. I'll leave it in the description box down below, and all the books that I mentioned as well, so you can click and buy them because they're all awesome, and great representation. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you're having a really good day, and I'll see you on my next video. Bye!